Good evening, students. Today, we'll start our discussion on one of the most iconic political thinkers, Karl Marx. Now, the advent of Karl Marx to the canvas of political philosophy marks a very big break in the political tradition. Now, Karl Marx had lived between 1818 to 1883. This was the time where the Industrial Revolution was almost at its pinnacle. It had reached its climax. Okay? Capitalism could be said to have reached its climax, its pinnacle. The world was colonized, and capitalism, in its drive for expansion, had created vast overseas empires. Capitalism had given to the world unprecedented growth. And capitalism, of course, with its ideas like secularism and democracy, also had been a tremendous impact. These liberal Western ideas, they inspired a lot of movements. They inspired revolutions. They inspired national liberation struggles. They inspired modernization of political systems. In a very big way, liberalism had been one of the greatest impacts in the modern civilization. And capitalism, of course, had reached its climax during this time. And Karl Marx lived during this phase, where capitalism, notwithstanding the unprecedented growth it had given to societies, also had been slowly displaying its darker side. Capitalism was showing so much of inequality, so much of exploitation, mechanization, leading to people losing touch with their sense of creation or ingenuity or a sense of purpose, where men were being reduced to machines, playing a part which is not usually very significant in the production process. A worker was reduced to a part of an automated assembly line, in which his role was merely fitting a nut or something like that, as was very artistically shown in a very famous movie of Charlie Chaplin called Modern Times, where a worker was helplessly reduced to be a piece of machinery without any thinking, without any need to use his originality or his skill, without even having to ponder on how he should do it. He becomes just a part of a machine, Such was the kind of working conditions and work culture that capitalism had propagated. Okay? So capitalism, on the one hand, had given the world unprecedented growth. At the same time, the darker or the evil side of capitalism also began to show very clearly. Okay? Inequalities, exploitation, alienation, mechanization, and frequent trade cycles, the inconsistencies between social needs and goods which are being produced, the aggrandizement, territorial expansion, imperialism, to acquire territories and overseas empires so that the hapless indigenous people could be exploited and their resources siphoned off to the colonial course. This was the order of the day. Capitalism had given to the world war. Capitalism had given to the world unscrupulous and primitive accumulation, blinded by their needs for profits, blinded by their necessities for expansion. Capitalism began to spread its tentacles across the entire world. It was during this time that there seemed to be no solution, nor there seemed to be any alternative to the capitalist mode of production. It was during this time that Karl Marx had taken his birth. And he grew like a colossus as far as political philosophy is concerned, and had given a new direction and charted a new course to political philosophy, which cannot be reversed, which cannot be turned back in time. And though a lot of people swear by The death of communism, death of Karl Marx. Karl Marx continues to haunt the developed and the underdeveloped countries, the avowedly capitalist democracies, as well as dictatorships. The spectre of Karl Marx continues to haunt whether he is dead or alive. And Karl Marx continues to be a force to reckon with, an irresistible reality. And that's the reason why Karl Marx is held with so much awe. Karl Marx had shown a new way or a new path to think. Today, there are a lot of things which we take for granted. Our work, our dreams, our culture, our beliefs. We take them for granted. Unapologetically, we nurture some beliefs, some values, without ever questioning them. Even the need to question these values don't arise in our minds. Democracy is the best form of government because it empowers people. This is a belief with which we live. This is the hope that nurtures and strengthens democracy. But is this really true? Is it really democracy a government of the people, by the people, for the people? Or is it a government of the people, by the people, for the rich? Karl Marx compels his readers to think differently. Not to take anything for granted. Today, we take it for granted that it is noble for a person to lay down his life for the sake of his country or for the sake of his nation. Patriotism is taken in its face value as a noble trait. These are values which are imprinted in our mind. Karl Marx compels individuals to think differently. Not to take anything for granted. Not to believe anything because it's just said. And Karl Marx applies this principle even for Marxism as well. When he says, I'm not a Marxist. I don't want anybody to be a Marxist. I want a person to first think, question me. Let me validate myself. Okay? He does not want individuals to be doctrinaire. He wants individuals to seek the truth by themselves. When Karl Marx says, see, consciousness will have to dawn. Consciousness will have to dawn. It won't dawn with preachings. It won't dawn with somebody's sermons. It won't dawn with somebody's appeals. His own material conditions will make individuals conscious of the truth. It is not the consciousness that determines how we live. Contrarily, it is how we live that determines our consciousness. Our consciousness will be shaped by our material conditions. Karl Marx says that consciousness is not something which can be imparted artificially by another person. It should be an experience of the self. It should be which is an outcome of individuals' own material experiences. This is how conscious will dawn on individuals. Karl Marx was speaking from a completely different plane. Please remember that till the time Karl Marx arrived on the scene, the history of Western political thought was inexorably the history of liberalism. Starting with Machiavelli, whom we discussed as the representative of the emerging bourgeois. But Thomas Hobbes or John Locke or even Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who had proposed the idea of popular sovereignty, and J.S. Mill, who proposed or who had held on a pedestal individual liberty. All these people were liberals with a hint of change here and there. All of them belong to the same stream, the liberal thought or the liberal ideology. There was no single political thinker of such great repute or of such impact as Karl Marx who belonged to the socialist tradition. It was Karl Marx who for the first time gave political thought a new direction. He charted out a completely different course for the stream of political thought to diverge into. Till the time there was a single course. Now, the stream of political thought could now diverge into another course, the socialist course. He belongs to the socialist stream. Okay. Also, please remember that Karl Marx marks a break in the advancement of political theory because he was the very first philosopher of the common man. Unlike the earlier philosophers who represented the capitalists or the emerging merchant class or the capitalists, Karl Marx was the philosopher of the common man. In Marxian philosophy, common man is the protagonist, is the hero. Okay? Karl Marx speaks about the interests of the working class who actually produce value. He is completely obsessed with this class, the working class. He eulogizes labor as the sole creator of value. It is the labor which creates value. Like John Locke, he also upheld the labor theory of value. Like Adam Smith, he also upheld the labor theory of value. For Karl Marx, labor, in fact, is the only and the original creator of value. Please remember that if you require to produce something, you require what are called as factors of production economy, isn't it? You require land, labor, capital, and organization. These are the four factors of production that you require to produce something. According to Karl Marx, of all the factors of production, labor is the only living factor, as all other factor requires to be acted upon by labor to create value. All other factors are sterile unless they are acted upon by labor. Therefore, labor is the only living part of the factors of production. He had eulogized the idea of labor as the sole producer of value. Okay? Now, that's the reason why it said that Karl Marx is the philosopher of the common man. Right? And he belongs to socialist stream. What exactly do we understand by socialist stream? Please remember that very broadly, there are two streams of political thought, the liberal stream and the socialist stream. The liberal stream of political thought emphasizes individuals' liberty. They emphasize individuals' freedom, not only from oppressive state rule, but also from social conditions or social impediments. The liberal stream of political thought emphasizes that only in an atmosphere of freedom that individual can be at his best, contribute at his best, fulfill the purposes of his life, only in an atmosphere of freedom or liberty. Now that's liberal ideology or liberal stream. They propose ideas like democracy, secularism, limited powers of the government, rule of law. All these are ideas which are proposed by liberals, because all these are conditions which enable individual to enjoy freedom or to enjoy liberty. The socialist stream of political thought, on the other hand, emphasizes equality. Equality, though not in absolute sense, because there is nothing like absolute equality, isn't it? Equality in such a way that no person should be strong enough to control the lives or the livelihoods of another, and no person should be weak enough to have to depend for his life or livelihood on another. The socialists speak about this type of equality. They seek to establish an egalitarian society. Okay? Egalitarian society, where social norms or social conditions will not be able to impose unjustified disabilities and deprivations on individuals. And no person is so strong to be able to control the life and livelihoods of another and no person is so weak to have to depend on another for his life or livelihood. Such type of egalitarianism is upheld by socialists. Okay, Karl Marx belongs to this stream or this tradition in political science. Okay, and you know that here was a man who was born with a purpose, who led a life with a purpose. Karl Marx was born in Prussia in 1818, and he had a Jewish descent. He was a Jew. Okay, and as a part of the Rabbi tradition, Karl Marx also displays intellectual arrogance and intellectual resistance to conformity. Okay, normally Jews, particularly people who belong to the Rabbi or the priestly class within Jews, okay, they were famed to be, having intellectual resistance to any form of ideas which were conformist. Okay, they despised ideas which were conformist and ideas which were primarily telling that we should follow these norms, we should follow these customs, and all these things. They were not against. They were against all such impositions. Okay, so he belonged to the Rabbi tradition, which is in the form of an intellectual rebellion against an established order. Okay, so let's say Karl Marx by birth is disposed to rebellion, okay, against conformity. Okay, so he was disposed to be an intellectual rebellion. Okay, and you know that as would a rebel have it, he was not very happy with the system that was seeking to impose, that was seeking to establish standards of behavior, right? He rebelled against all these. He was drunk, he was disorderly, he had membership in the drunkards groups, right? They were very fondly called then as the drinking society, where people used to come together and sit and drink, obviously, right? And he was also a member of the poetic club, because he had a literary bent of mind, and he was a member of the poetic club. He was a member of the drinking society. He was a member of the militant groups as a student. Okay, he was drunk, disorderly. He was a handsome person, but he was not very orderly. He was disorderly. He was drunk most of the times. Throughout his youth, he entered into reckless relationships, fleeting affairs, He was like that. But ultimately, he emerged as one of the most influential figures of the 20th century, and responsible for, in one way or another, the breaking up the world into two blocks, the liberal and the socialist blocks. Okay? He was so influential that half of the world revered him as God, while the other half despised him as a devil incarnate himself. Okay? Today, after centuries have passed since Karl Marx had breathed his last, a lot of people tend to associate him with the epitaph of a god that failed. Okay? However, as I told you, dead or alive, Karl Marx haunts every nook and corner of political philosophy. Today, one of the most cogent criticism of capitalism has come through the pen of Karl Marx. As I told you, Karl Marx compels us to look into things from a completely different way. After we finish off with Karl Marx, you will see that you will be starting to view things from a different way. The idea of democracy, the idea of religion, for example, okay, the idea of work, right, and the idea of academic pursuit, how we should interpret the reality, how we should see the reality. Our idea of history, for instance. Okay, till recent times, you know that history was primarily political history, which spoke about kings, dynasties, kingdoms, literature, a little art and architecture. Okay, it spoke about the conquests, and sometimes even love stories of the kings. Okay, Taj Mahal, called as romance in marble, and all that. Okay, all this type of history, according to Karl Marx, is bourgeois history. Bourgeois is a term which is German in its origin, which very loosely translates into the possessing class, the class which possesses, or which is in control of the wealth, or of all those factors which are required to produce. That class is called as the bourgeois. Okay? Now, whatever is the type of history that we've all been speaking about till now is, according to Karl Marx, bourgeois history. Okay? This the history as the bourgeois wants us to understand. Not the true history. It's a narrative. Okay? It's the history that the bourgeois wants us to see. It's not true history. According to Karl Marx, history lies at the base of the society, which is often overlooked. History should be about how men have lived and worked and survived and produced. That should be history. Because at the base of everything is our need to live, our need to survive. That's at the base of everything. So true history should be a history which is focused on the life of a common man, life of a producer. This is true history. This should be the focus of true history. If you're not studying this, then you're not studying true history. What you're studying is bourgeois history. History looked at from the lens imposed by the bourgeois, the ruling class. Okay? This is what Karl Marx is saying. Very simply. I told you, right? Karl Marx compels us to look at everything from a different point of view. Your education, your values, the faiths which guide your thought and action, the beliefs that you carry very close to your heart, the beliefs that you have about the political institutions, about justice, those which you carry very close to your heart. These fundamental things are questioned by Karl Marx. He, as I told you, was a philosopher who was intent on giving that person, that worker, a better deal, that producer of value, a better deal. And in that process, Karl Marx, as I told you, emerges as the first voice in political science that represents a common man, that represents the interests of a common man. And this is the new tradition, the new course that Karl Marx introduces for political science, and more importantly for political thought. Karl Marx had lived and written at times when capitalism, as I told you, was at its peak, when industrial revolution had given unprecedented growth, when there seemed to be no alternative in the way societies are organized. He lived and he wrote at times when societies were clearly converging on the ideas of liberalism and capitalism as the best ways to organize society, because it had given abundance. The growth was unprecedented. Okay? So, Karl Marx was probably the very first political thinker who braved this near universal idea of capitalism, who dared to challenge it, who dared to criticize it. And as I told you, Till that, Karl Marx remains the most potent and the most effective critique of capitalism. He had in fact himself claimed that I had written so much about capital with so little capital to spare. He lived a life of revolutionary. He lived poor in material, though he was a materialist. He wrote extensively about capital, yet he remained merely surviving and with subsistence, having most of the times to depend on the capital of somebody else, his close friend, his associate, Friedrich Engels. Karl Marx lived a life of a true revolutionary. Born in Prussia, was banned from Prussia. He was forced to move to France, where he started a paper. His paper was banned and he was expelled from France. And then he was forced to move to Belgium. In Belgium, he was arrested, he was charged with the offense of revolutionizing the working classes, or the workers. He was tried for treason, found guilty, pardoned, and was expelled from Belgium. From there, he went to France again, and he was strictly this time put under state observation. Every movement and every word that came from Karl Marx was subjected to scrutiny from the state. He found the state observation so stifling that he, this time, was forced to flee from France. And from France again, he went to his motherland, Prussia. In Prussia, his paper was suppressed, his office was ransacked and destroyed, and he was ordered to leave the country in peace, never to return back to Prussia again, his homeland. From there, Karl Marx went to Austria, but then he was not allowed entry into that country. From there, he went to Britain, where he spent his last days and where he breathed his last. Karl Marx died a stateless person, though he had given immensely to the world, contributing to its knowledge, its understanding, and its interpretation of reality. Karl Marx was truly a universal man. This was a person who was now taking the might of capitalism, challenging it head on. This person, as I told you, belongs to the Jewish community. Okay, and he was German. Obviously, a deadly combination, a German Jew. He was asked once to explain Christianity as briefly as possible. Karl Marx gave a very simplistic reply. He said, Christianity is very easy. It's very easy to understand. In fact, you don't have to even complete a sentence to speak about Christianity and make it understandable to others. You can do it in a small phrase. And Christianity simply means love thy neighbor. Love thy neighbor. That's the essence of Christianity. According to Karl Marx. He was asked the same vein to briefly make communism sensible, understandable, comprehensible. Karl Marx began by saying, men need to live. To live, they have to eat. To eat, they need to work. They need to work because they have to produce. For producing, man needs tools or means of production. But if these means of production are controlled by a section of society, then a relationship of dependence of one man over the other will ensue. A relationship of dependence will ensue. And this relationship of dependence of one over the other will lead to exploitation. This exploitation of man by man is the cause for all the strife, for all the crime, for all the persecution, for all the murder. And this exploitation of man by man should end. And that shall end with the advent of communism. The advent of communism, according to Karl Marx, marks humankind's giant leap from kingdom of necessity, want and scarcity to kingdom of true freedom and liberty. To that kingdom of freedom, men will inexorably, irresistibly travel. This is the essence of communism. Men will realize communism. If not today, tomorrow. If not tomorrow, day after. Sometime in history, sometime in the future, if not in near future, men will inexorably, irresistibly lead to communism. That is the final phase of human social evolution. Societies evolve from primitive societies in which men were food gatherers and hunters and fishermen. They have evolved into slave society and feudal societies and capitalist societies, and the evolution will continue till a final society will be realized which marks man's giant leap from kingdom of want and scarcity to kingdom of true freedom. Into that true freedom will man organize the society, and that would be communist society. Karl Marx says that this is the essence of communism. Men require to live they require to eat they require to work, through work they require to produce. But for production, for producing something, men require tools or means of production. And if these means of production are controlled by a section of society, it leads to a relationship of dependence of one man or the other, which ultimately leads to exploitation. And it is this exploitation which is the bane of all societies. It is this exploitation which leads to all strife, conflict, wars, all kinds of deprivations. And this exploitation of man by man should end. That shall end with the advent of communism. And this is where every society in the world will irresistibly reach to finally. Okay? Look, Karl Marx is here prophesizing about a future society called communist society, which Karl Marx says that is going to happen. It will happen. It will happen because men are continuously in search of better conditions of life. We are in search of better conditions of life. Okay? So every society will turn a communist society in future. Okay? So this is what Karl Marx is saying. So the basic problem according to Karl Marx lies in the fact that the means of production, the things that we require to produce, are controlled by a section of society. Okay? Which creates opportunity for exploitation and which is at the root of every problem in society. Okay? So very broadly, this is what Karl Marx is saying, right? And to say this, Karl Marx comes out with a series of concepts like dialectical materialism, historical interpretation of society. He comes out with a series of theories like the theory of surplus value, the theory of class struggle. He comes out with a series of analysis about the contradictions of capitalism, okay, the conditions leading to alienation. He creates different types of political systems like the socialist system, the communist system. Okay? All these are done by Karl Marx to establish his belief that societies, because of all their conditions, would ultimately lead to a perfect, well-ordered society called communist society. That is the journey of every society. And all the different societies that we see in the world are at different stations of their journey. Okay, some societies are a little ahead and some societies are a little behind, you know. Some societies are still feudal. Some societies are in the phase of early capitalist society. Some societies are at a stage of mature capitalism. Okay, and some societies may have turned socialist, you know. Karl Marx says that every society, irrespective of its present reality, will ultimately march towards a communist society, realizing a communist society. That is, realizing a state of complete and perfect freedom. Okay, this is what Karl Marx is saying very briefly, right? As I told you, to establish this belief of Karl Marx, he comes out with a series of concepts, theories, analysis, and a series of claims and arguments and all that. Okay. Now, as I told you, Karl Marx belongs to the socialist stream of political thought. Okay, and socialism, as I told you, seeks to emphasize equality. Okay, or creation of an egalitarian society. Okay, where no person is so strong to be able to control the life or livelihoods of others, and no person is so weak to be able to depend on another for his life or livelihood. Okay, such type of a society called socialist society was visualized by a good number of thinkers. Even before Karl Marx also they were socialists. Okay, and today, before proceeding with Karl Marx, I'd like to very briefly give you a distinction as normally as understood between socialist and capitalist modes of production. Okay, I'm sure we must have discussed this a few classes earlier, but still, as a recapitulation, the fundamental distinction between socialist and capitalist mode of productions is socialism believes in common ownership. Common ownership. Control, management of means of production. So whatever we require to produce, right? For example, we discussed a few minutes earlier that we require land, we require labor, we require capital, we require organization. All these are required for us to produce, isn't it? To produce goods or services, you require all these means of production, which in economy you call as factors of production. You require these means of production. Socialism believes in common ownership of these means of production. Land, labor, capital, and organization will be held under common ownership. Okay, it means things that we require to produce, which are essential for everybody's survival, should not be controlled by private individuals, should not be allowed to be owned privately. Things that are required for producing to sustain the needs of everybody should be under common ownership. They should not be under private ownership or control. Okay, that's the first condition for socialism. Capitalism, on the other hand, believes in private ownership. Private ownership of means of production. They believe that these means of production, like land, labor, capital, organization, these means of production held under private ownership, private control, and private management will result in optimum utilization. because private individuals are always motivated by profits. Okay, so in their quest for greater profits, they put these means of production to their optimum use. So capitalism believes that it is always good for society that these means of production should be held under private ownership. That's the first distinction. And therefore, capitalism upholds individuals' right to acquire, possess, utilize and dispose property. So right to property is the instrument through which the private ownership of means of production are organized. Okay, so individuals are given right to acquire, right to own, and right to possess and right to utilize these means of production. And because they are governed or because they are motivated by profits, they put these resources to their maximum use, to their best use, optimal use. Okay, which yields better returns and better value in employment of these factors for production. So in employment of these factors for production, better value can be yielded if they are put under private ownership. That's the first difference between socialist and the capitalist mode of production. Second, socialist mode of production, as I told you, always emphasizes equality. Okay, so all individuals should have equal access to the means of production. All individuals should have equal access to the fruits of production. Okay, so in production, in decision making, in distribution, there should be equality. Okay, so socialism emphasizes equality and strives at creation of an egalitarian society where all individuals' needs are fulfilled and where there is no relationship of dependence of one man over the other. No man is so strong that he can control the lives and livelihoods of another, and no man is so weak to have to depend on another for his life or livelihood. Such is the idea of socialism. Okay, so whatever we have, we should try to ensure that everybody has equal and dignified share of the fruits of production, of which he is a part. Capitalism, on the other hand, emphasizes individual liberty. Okay, it assumes that individuals are rational, and it assumes that individuals' drive or self-interest is the prime motive for all endeavor, all effort, and all production. Okay, so individuals should be given liberty because they are rational, they have their self-interests, and they pursue their self-interests, and in each individual pursuing his self-interest, common interest is realized. Common good is realized. This is the idea of capitalism. Third, socialism believes that an egalitarian society should be realized through active state intervention in production. Active state intervention in production. Okay, through instruments like planning, right? Or through public sector enterprises. The state should be present in a big way in the production process. The state should take economic decisions. State should control the trend, the direction, and the goals of economic development. State should distribute, state should produce, State should rely on planning. State should impose controls. And state should organize production through public sector enterprises. The private sector will be absent. Or even if it is present, its presence will only be negligible. The lion's share of the production and production process is occupied by the public sector. It is the public sector which drives all the production process. Okay? That is a socialist mode of production or socialist economy. Capitalists, on the other hand, believe that it is private sector and private enterprise which, acting on market principles, will take economic decisions. And state will play a minimum role. State's role is going to be minimum. State's role is going to be limited to regulatory functions like maintaining law and order, establishing rule of law, or protection from threats, or enforcement of contracts. Only such regulatory functions should be performed by state. Beyond this, the state should not have any kind of a role. Okay? So, individuals acting through private sector will take the aid of market principles to take economic decisions, and state's role will be minimum. So this very broadly are the differences between socialists and capitalists. Okay? So common ownership, emphasis on equality, active state intervention in production, and the state will act through public sector enterprises, and state will be the major producer, the major decision maker, okay, as far as economic activities are concerned, right? So this is how socialist and capitalist economies differ from each other, okay? And when we say that Karl Marx belongs to socialist stream, Karl Marx emphasizes on collectivity rather than on individual ownership. Okay? Karl Marx also emphasizes on equality because he believes that only through equality that true freedom can be realized. You cannot realize freedom in an atmosphere of inequality. Okay? And of course, there are a few differences, right? Moving ahead, but he belongs very broadly to the socialist stream. That's what we all should understand as far as Karl Marx is concerned. Third, Karl Marx is also considered as a materialist. Okay? Now we'll have to elaborate on all these very soon. We'll do that. But please remember that Karl Marx is also considered to be a materialist because he believes that material existence is central to man's life. Okay? See, to be alive first is important. Okay? Only then comes, art, God, everything. First thing is that we have to be alive. Material existence comes first. Man was a producer because he has to live. And to live, he has to eat. And to eat, he has to produce. So production or producing something of value was a precondition for his survival. Therefore, man, to begin with, was a producer. Man was a producer even before he began to think or contemplate or develop art or think about politics. Man was a producer. Okay? This is what's called as materialism. Material existence. That existence is central to a man's life. And all other aspects or motivations like religion, art, are a part of what Karl Marx calls as false consciousness. They're not true consciousness. They are false consciousness. My religion, my language, my caste, all these are false consciousness. Consciousness which was imposed on your mind and which over a period of time you assume to be the true consciousness. But that is not true consciousness. It's a part of false consciousness according to Karl Marx. We'll come to all these concepts very soon. Okay? And Karl Marx, calls his brand of socialism as scientific socialism. Karl Marx calls his brand of socialism as scientific socialism. Okay, what does it mean? It simply means that it is a socialism which is established through scientific principles according to Karl Marx. It is not something which is an outcome of a luxury of armchair thinking or dreamy contemplations or some comfortable utopias into which the political philosophers have drifted into. It is not an outcome of all these. According to Karl Marx, Marxist socialism is scientific socialism. This is an ideology which is very firmly grounded in science and scientific principles. Therefore, he calls his brand of socialism as scientific socialism. Okay. So this was the man that we're going to speak about, Karl Marx. Okay. We're going to speak about his ideology, okay, which is called as Marxism. We're going to speak about all those concepts which Karl Marx proposes. He speaks about dialectical idealism and historical materialism and all that. Okay, we'll speak about all these concepts which Karl Marx says. But I'm sure you must have gathered something about Karl Marx here in the brief lecture that we had on Karl Marx. There must be something that you must have gathered. Okay, first, remember that Karl Marx marks a break in the advancement of political theory because he was not a bourgeois thinker. He was not representative of the bourgeois thought. He, for the first time, represented the common man and his interests against bourgeois order. Okay, till this time, political science and political thought was inexorably bourgeois. Okay, that's the reason why the most dominant ideology was liberalism. The most dominant form of government as conceived by most number of nations was democracy. Okay, and beliefs and values which were bourgeois primarily were entrenched and considered as the best way to organize society. The principle of competition, the invisible hands of demand and supply, minimum state, secularism, all these were values which are associated with the bourgeois social order. These fundamental tenets of the modern society were challenged by Karl Marx when he said, your ideas of democracy, your ideas of patriotism and nationalism, your values and belief systems, your concept of God itself are a part of false consciousness. True consciousness is beyond this. This is a part of consciousness which is imprinted into your minds. You know? Yeah, Marx was compelling us to think and question about everything which we have accepted as for granted. That's the reason why the Marxist thought is considered sometimes as critical theory. Okay, sometimes called as critical theory. It seeks us to think critically about everything. Okay, so this is something in the form of an introduction to Karl Marx. Okay, so we'll be dwelling very deeply into Karl Marx, trying to understand his very essence and his concepts. Okay, a very elaborate political thinker because he had impact on so many disciplines. He impacted sociology, anthropology, political science, public administration, international relations, economics, law, jurisprudence. So many fields of knowledge came under the influence of Marxism. And in every field or in every discipline, Karl Marx had designed a separate course, a separate path in trying to interpret the reality. Okay, that was his influence, right? Can you tomorrow try to take a look at what Karl Marx is all about, what or how he begins his political thought. Please remember, my dear friends, that understanding Karl Marx's concepts becomes very important, because the kind of questions which are being given in the examinations, they implore you to understand the essence of Karl Marx. It's not just about learning what is dialectics and all that. For example, in 2024, the question that was given was in the form of, Marxism as an ideology requires action without compromise on fundamental principles. Without compromise on fundamental principles. See, for writing an answer like this, you'll have to understand the essence of Karl Marx. The very essence of Karl Marx. Right? So, Marxism as an ideology, it propels individuals to action. Okay? Without ever compromising on core principles. Okay? Why this question was asked? This question was asked like this because it is only through proper understanding of Karl Marx that you'll realize that if only you are committed to the core principles of Marxism, that you realize the need for action. Why is it that Karl Marx gives a clarion call for all the workers of the world to unite, declaring, the workers of the world unite, you got nothing to lose but your chains. His clarion call was for the workers of the world to unite. Right? That action will come from the workers only after they realize the true nature of capitalism, the predatory nature of capitalism. Okay? So it's only through fundamental or core principles of Marxism that you can see the reality, and that reality will compel you to action. See, it's only after you properly understand Karl Marx that you can ever attempt writing answers to such kind of questions. Okay? So having a proper understanding of Karl Marx is important, right? And we'll try to do that from tomorrow onwards. Okay? Thank you so much.